The Patrick Riggins Show. Call in now, 865-243-TALK. That's 243-8255. And now your host, Patrick Riggins.
Welcome to the Patrick Riggins Show. Tirelessly working each week to bring you a front seat on the lines of the battle for freedom, liberty, and the restoration of the Constitution. I am here each week to try and help educate in these three forgotten ideals of individual responsibility. Not like a lot of radio shows who forget these important principles when it is convenient to do so, or when it does not fit with their message of the day. Here, we stubbornly stick to our libertarian foundation and learn to live and worry about our own personal lives and let others worry about theirs. And the radio station on which you listen to this antithesis of a daytime talk show is WNOX FM 100.3. We are currently being heard in parts of 5 of these great southeastern United States and both the eastern and central time zones. But if you'd like to watch us as well as listen to the show, you are in luck. Just go to www.wnoxfm.com. There you can tune into the audio and video feed from the live in-studio camera. That address again is wnoxfm.com. And normally at this time, we would say hello to our show producer, Tori, but he has absconded to a more southern part of the country. Now, I don't know if it had anything to do with the law enforcement officers that were here earlier in the day looking for him or not, but I guess we can ask him about that when he feels it's safe to return to Tennessee. So in his place, we have substitute Tori Shine.
Good morning, or good afternoon.
Yeah, you're still functioning on the morning.
That's right. I've been here for a while, but we're ready.
Ready to go. Ready with the show, yeah. And we're not going to be mad at Tori because he's lounging around in the sun on the beach.
Well, not too mad anyway.
Yeah. We'll just make him work double hard next week.
There you go.
I'll get all kinds of clips and everything running and just really screw him up. All right. Before we get started, I always want to thank you, the listeners to the show, who are helping make it a success. Without you, well, I guess I'd just be sitting here talking to myself and Shine. But luckily for me, you're tuning in greater and greater numbers each week. And I can only attribute that to your enthusiasm for this show and telling others to listen. I greatly, greatly appreciate each and every one of you out there. I think one of the reasons for this show doing so well out of the gate is that we are providing a voice to a point of view that is mostly missing from talk radio. Sure, there are conservatives doing shows that come close, but unfortunately, they drop the ball when it comes to the heavy lifting required on some issues. One thing I've noticed a lot of people talking about, but not really coming to the correct conclusion on, is why this country seems to be on the edge at the moment. Why everyone seems to be uncertain and wondering about what is to come. The simple answer is, and that is really what it is, nothing complex about it, is that government is taking such a huge role in the country these days that people feel as if they are losing control of their lives. To a certain extent, they are. That is a very, very unsettling feeling. The future does not seem to really offer much. We have a Democratic president running for re-election who is apparently committed to bankrupting this country. And the crazy thing is, everyone on both sides are pointing out that this is going to happen. We have a Republican presidential hopeful who apparently is committed to the same thing, just on a little bit longer time schedule. So we can either run out of money in the near future, or we can delay the inevitable for a little while longer but still get to the same place. That, to an increasingly amount of people, is not really comforting. So what is the answer? What are we to do? Well, the worst thing we can do is to give up. We absolutely cannot do that. Our country is far, far too great to allow a bunch of big, intrusive government, or less big but still intrusive government types, to take this country from us. Our forefathers and foremothers fought and sacrificed so we could live in a free country. Not so some elected, self-appointed nannies and unelected bureaucrats could infringe on our freedoms and liberties just because they feel like they know more than we do about how we should live our lives. No, what we need to do is to hold these elected people and unelected bureaucrats they appoint accountable. The way to do that is to get involved in their lives. Since they feel like they need to know what we're doing 24 hours a day, we need to start watching them, and for an even better reason, they work for us. So, just like you would not hire someone to work for you and then not follow up to make sure they're doing their job correctly, you need to watch what your representatives are doing, not just at the federal level, but the state and local levels as well. When they are exceeding their authority or making bad decisions, you need to let them know it is wrong and, well, you're not going to tolerate it. Just calling into radio shows like this one or writing to the newspaper or complaining to your friends and coworkers, that is all well and good because it makes other people think, but you also need to be letting your representatives know as well. Let them know when they are doing something right, too. So if they're standing up for what is right, let them know you're behind them because they're under a lot of pressure to conform, to go along, to just do things like things have always been done. This is why so many people say one thing when they're running for office and then do something else when they get in. Now, partly is because some of these people have no principles, but part of it is good old-fashioned peer pressure. It is the people they're seeing every day, the lobbyists promising trips, jobs for their relatives, campaign money, and even outright bribes. And unfortunately, a lot of these people are not grounded enough to be confronted with this type of temptations and still hold firm. Knowing they have people in their district constantly watching them and letting them know they are veering off the right path, and even more importantly, letting them know when they are going the right way, they have a much, much better chance of following their principles and always voting for freedom and liberty. So why not today, not tomorrow, not later in the week, but today? Sit down and write or email your representatives to let them know what you agree with and what you disagree with. Either way, they will know one more person is taking note of what they're doing. And keep listening to this show as well and tell others about it so we can keep the torch of freedom, liberty, and the restoration of the Constitution alive and burning. We will be back with the rest of the show after this break. We will be talking about the Defense of Marriage Act, your health, and why the government cares. And here's no surprise, more government spending, along with your calls and anything else that might come up. This is Patrick Riggins with the Patrick Riggins Show. We'll be back after the break with the second segment of the show, and we'll have a lot more coming up.
Fighting for freedom, liberty, and the restoration of the Constitution. The Patrick Riggins Show. Call in now at 865-243-8255. That's 243-TALK. And now your host, Patrick Riggins.
And welcome back to the Patrick Riggins Show. It's Patrick Riggins, along with Shine, doing the radio show producing today. Putting in a long shift because Tori, the lazy producer, took a vacation. Sean, didn't he get a vacation last week or last year?
I guess he did,
and he wants one this year too.
We got to keep him happy.
Gosh, I tell you, I suppose he wants lunch too.
I guess so.
That's just amazing. How uncommitted is he? All right, this week a federal appeals court struck down as unconstitutional a part of the 1996 Defense of Marriage Act, specifically the part that stated in states such as Massachusetts, where gays and lesbians can legally marry, the federal government can deny these couples the right to file a joint tax return or receive a survivor's benefit under the Social Security Act. Now, whether you agree with same-sex marriage or not, this was clearly unconstitutional. The Constitution guarantees that everyone is created equal and that government has to treat us all as such. This is where a lot of people start getting tripped up on their quest to being more libertarian in their thinking. They encounter a hot button issue like gay marriage and immediately put the brakes on their, quote, keeping government out of our lives thinking. So you have to understand, freedom and liberty mean that everyone has the same natural rights that everyone else has. Rights that are retained by people just because they are human. These rights are not given by anyone or anything. They just exist within our very nature. Part of these rights are the pursuit of happiness as long as it does not infringe on anyone else's rights and freedoms. Now, the interesting thing to watch is the reaction of liberals in the media who applaud this decision and state that government has to treat everyone the same. But these are the same people who will say that government programs that are set up to reward one group of people over another are completely constitutional and see nothing wrong with treating one group of citizens differently than another. But as listeners to this show, you know that the overriding rule is freedom and liberty, whether you necessarily agree with someone's particular way of living or not. So here is a nice quote, and I've played this a couple of weeks ago on this show from Representative Dr. Ron Paul, which nicely sums up what your attitude on this should be.
I think the government should just be out of it. I think it should be done by the church or private contract, and we shouldn't have this argument. Who's married and who isn't married? I have my standards, but I shouldn't have to impose my standards on others. Others have standards, and they have no right to impose their marriage standards on me, and I just don't like it. But if we want to have something to say about marriage, it should be at the state level and not at the federal government. Just get the government out of its one area where it's totally unnecessary and they've caused more trouble than necessary.
So there you go. You have your standards, I have my standards, and the government should not be endorsing yours over mine or vice versa. Now, you might be saying, well, Patrick, what about Christianity? And what about religion? What about what they have to say? Well, in response, I would tell you, don't do what you are not comfortable with doing. If your religion forbids marrying someone of the same sex, then don't do it. If you are not religious and still don't agree with it, again, just don't do it. It is the same thing as if your religion states that drinking any sort of alcohol is wrong. Then you should not do it. But the government should not take that to mean that it should strip away everybody's freedoms to drink if they so desire. Just because one group of people declare it to be wrong doesn't mean it's wrong for everybody. We should all be free to do as we wish, again, as long as it does not trample on the freedoms and liberties of another person. So why in the world, for instance, do I even have to get a marriage license to get married? Why is the government licensing marriages at all? Here in the state of Tennessee, marriage is actually regulated by state law. A state law regulating marriage in a state in a supposedly free country called America. So in Tennessee, to get married, I have to come up with $97.50 to get a license to be married. Yeah, Sean.
I just did that last October. Had to sit down with a member of our fine Knox County government and answer a bunch of questions and hand him a check and then get a piece of paper, and then I was married. Not after the ceremony. It's when I handed the check and the signed piece of paper over to the government. That's when I was married.
Which is ridiculous. Also, if you want, though, you can only pay $37.50. But if you do that, you have to have permission of someone else who's your could be an ordained minister or a professional counselor.
Yeah, that's true. But even that, we tried to do that, and there's a lot of hoops to jump through for that too.
Yeah,
has to be someone that they verify, and you got to do it so many weeks in advance before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and which again is just ridiculous. And as Sean just noted, the application for a marriage license, they want to know information like the groom's and bride's names, their birth dates and birth states, which number marriage this is for them, and why their last one ended and when it ended and why. They want to know their educational information. And even that is not enough. The state of Tennessee also has to know their prospective couple's parents' names as well. So I guess...
And where they're born.
Yeah, I just asked, what's this got to do with anything? The answer is nothing. It's because we have sat here and allowed ridiculous things like this to happen. And no, I'm not talking about marriage itself. I'm talking about the licensing of it. But could you imagine marriage in a libertarian world? Government would have nothing to do with it. Nothing. What would happen is that I would find somebody I love, presumably they would love me too, and we would decide we want to live together and maybe even raise a family. Now, before all the people who know me have a heart attack, I'm not saying I'm getting married, just to be clear, because most people know I equate the marriage ceremony and a funeral along roughly the same lines. But if I would decide to get married, though, and if I had any sort of property or money I'd want to protect coming into the marriage, and the person I'm marrying would probably have some as well, we would sit down at a lawyer's office and draw up a marriage contract. We would decide what we would get should things not work out, and then we'd get married. Now, if you really want to go down this road and try to see if you can think like a libertarian, let's throw this into the mix as well. Let's say we define in the marriage contract, I don't know, maybe a certain level of weight that must be maintained. or the house must be a certain size. Or we must have a certain amount of children before a defined age. And if not by then children are not allowed. See, I can take the romance and excitement straight out of marriage, no problem. But really, marriage is a contract between two people, and things can be defined in that contract. And when things are defined, all sorts of problems can be avoided. But if you still want to do things the regular way, by just getting married and not having any sort of contract or anything else, then you could just say you're married. If you wanted to have a ceremony in your church, your synagogue, your mosque, or your house, you could. It is not anyone else's business what you do. Now, if things go south and you don't have details spelled out in a marriage contract, well, then you'd probably have to go to court to get everything straightened out. But that is what court is for, settling disputes among different parties. What about a business providing benefits, though, that normally gives benefits to the conventional spouse of one of its workers? Well, since we are imagining a libertarian-type society, we would also allow businesses to provide benefits to whomever they choose, however they choose. We would not compel them through law to provide anything. If a prospective employee did not like the package being offered, well, they don't have to work there. That is freedom. As far as the government is concerned, we the people, from whom the power to govern is derived, should not be providing anything other than a salary to the people who choose to work for the government. If they don't like that, then don't work there. In this libertarian type of world, the role of government is so small in the daily lives of people that, well, shoot, we probably don't need 1/10 of the employees we have there now anyway. So the issue of providing benefits in that situation, as far as the government's concerned, it'd be moot. And this court ruling about providing federal social benefits to spouses in same-sex marriages would not apply either, because the government would not be providing those services in the first place. And that's how it would work in this magical society of living in a libertarian type of world. Now, don't fool yourself and think that's how this really happens. For the guys out there, I would suggest not bringing this type of thing up with their female counterpart, because I don't think you'd get very far. Do you, Shine? You're married.
Well, no, you got to. I mean,
yeah, that's
we live in the world we live in.
Exactly.
It's kind of like that. I mean, you were talking about kind of an ideal. And I personally would like it better if it was more of that world, but
yeah.
I had to do what I had to do in order to get, like you said, benefits and tax advantages, different things like that, where you have to do this thing the government asks you to do
Yeah.
in order. It's bait and switch or carrot at the end of the stick or that kind of
Sure,
deal.
yeah. It's the government dangling the carrot and saying, if you get married, we'll give you a better tax break, whereas that is you look in the Constitution, it doesn't specify anything like that.
Well, they justify the getting all that personal information and getting the license by saying you will get these benefits if you give up that information,
Yeah.
or like what I
give
would
us
say,
some freedom.
Give us some freedom,
Yeah.
and we'll buy you off here.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. All right, we're at the bottom of the hour. This is Patrick Riggins with the Patrick Riggins Show. We'll return after these quick messages with the second half of the show. Be sure and tune in.
Fighting for freedom, liberty, and the restoration of the Constitution. The Patrick Riggins Show. Call in now at 865-243-8255. That's 243-TALK. And now your host, Patrick Riggins.
And this is Patrick Riggins with the Patrick Riggins Show, coming back for the second half with fun and excitement, and more importantly, news, information, and why you should be thinking like a libertarian. Anyway, this week, the city of Knoxville, which is I'm just going to cover this local one real quick. I understand that this show reaches 5 states and across parts of 2 time zones, but we want to hit a little local stuff here too, because I think the example, just like we talked about last week, applies everywhere locally, because these same issues are coming up. The city of Knoxville, they've been crying about the county not rubber stamping the school's $35 million increase, which is coming up for a vote. And really, that $35 million increase is really disingenuous, because it's not just a $35 million increase. I noted as such on the show. Here's a little clip from that from last week. Schools would actually be getting a $48 million increase over last year. You see, $13 million is so-called natural growth, meaning they get that whether you like it or not. And then the $35 million is over and above that. Thus, the entire Knox County school budget is now almost $424 million. In fact, if you add in the federal and state money, Knox County schools spent $518 million last year. That's $500 million just to educate students here in Knox County. So, with all this controversy swirling around about budgets, the city of Knoxville feels it is a good idea to get started spending money on the South Knoxville waterfront. Just in case you're not keeping score, when they spend taxpayers' money, they are spending your money. The justification is that they hope, and I will say that word again, just so it sinks in good and deep, they hope it will spur private investment. This is exactly what government does not need to be doing, spending our hard-earned money in the hope that something good comes of it. Private companies, which are just fronts for private citizens, they all want to make money. That is why they are in business. They want to make money. If they thought they could do it by investing on the waterfront of Knoxville, well, then they'd do so. If they don't think they can get a good return on their investment in that area, then they won't put their money up. But far too many times, government decides its role is to try and goad the private sector into investing money into what it deems is important. And if that doesn't work, then government will frequently pass regulations mandating investment. Now, what the city needs to do is concentrate on providing the necessary services, such as police protection, and let the private sector decide if the waterfront needs development or not. That is not good enough for the busybodies in government. They see other metropolitan areas with developed waterfronts and feel like we should do that as well, even if they have to spend your money to make it happen. Make no mistake, their friends from those other areas, those other metropolitan areas, come to Knoxville and tell them, hey, you should have a nice waterfront like we do. So some people here in Knoxville want the waterfront developed because, daggone it, they're getting tired of being made fun of by their friends from out of town. Now, they don't want to spend their money on it. No, they want to spend your money on it, because if it doesn't work out, oh well, at least they have some nice walking trails to enjoy. Bought and paid for, by the way, with your taxpayer dollars. You see, you need to always run these news stories in the paper, on television, on the internet, through your libertarian filter that this radio show is helping you to develop. When you see politicians delighted to spend more of your money on a project, and the newspaper actually described one city councilman as getting excited about the prospect of this very thing, you need to start holding on to your wallet and making phone calls to let them know you don't agree with this. Not because you're mean-spirited or want to deprive someone of something, but because it is not right for government to recklessly spend taxpayers' money on things it has no business doing. Again, we'll go back to a show clip from just this last week when I talked about this. Giving me the argument that the difference on taxes is, maybe 2 cents or even $1 on your tax bill. It does not matter. Doing what is right is what matters. No matter how small the payback, no matter how small the return, you are doing what is right, and that is the important thing. Thoughtlessly spending people's tax money on items in the budget because, quote, that's just how we've always done it, is not the way to put together a budget. And that is one thing you will always hear on this show: consistency. This show will always be fighting for the freedom and liberty of the individual. And an important part of this freedom and liberty is depriving the government of any and all extra money it feels it might need. Because unlike the private sector, where the pie gets bigger and it is not a zero-sum game, it is a zero-sum game with the government. When it gets more money, you get less, because the government has to take your money in order to do the things it does. This is just how it works. Despite what the media and the politicians will tell you, government cannot create wealth. It can only take wealth. And we need to be sure it is obeying the Constitution and only spending it in ways it is allowed. And when it seeks to expand its options on spending, then we need to very carefully look at what it wants to do. 9 times out of 10, we can safely deny them the request. So if you are not, quote, getting excited, unquote, as the city council is about spending money on something we shouldn't, then you need to get on the phone or send an email or letter to your city council representative and tell them to stop spending all this money on stuff it has no business funding. Because remember, as I always say on this show, these people work for you. Make sure they know you are watching them and that you're not going to tolerate them wasting your hard-earned money. I ran across an interesting article the other day while I was doing a show prep for this week. It was about some research that was being done at the University of Tennessee on power and corruption in human societies. 2 researchers there came to the conclusion that power and corruption may play a role in maintaining overall societal cooperation. Yeah, you heard that correctly. They think having people in power who are corrupt is not such a bad thing. What they found is that the bulk of society cooperates because there are people who are in charge of enforcing the law, basically keeping the population in line. And the population tends to cooperate because they do not want to be punished. Now, if you wanted any more of a liberal outlook on life, I don't know where you would find it. The only reason people behave is because they don't want to be punished. That is just straight out of the liberal handbook. The even more credible quote, finding, unquote, is that if law enforcers consider themselves above the law and they behave in a corrupt way, then overall societal cooperation is maintained. as long as there's just a small amount of power and corruption. This societal cooperation breaks down if there's too much power and corruption in the law enforcement ranks. So the people in law enforcement, what they say is they often enjoy privileges that allow them to avoid the full force of law when they break it. And law enforcement results in the general public abiding by the law. Therefore, people in law enforcement enjoy the benefits of a lawful society and are compensated for their job as law enforcement by being able to dodge the law. So, in conclusion to this ridiculous paper, the researchers say that power and corruption benefit society because without law enforcement, individuals would have less incentive to cooperate, and without power and corruption, the people in law enforcement would have less incentive to do their job. So I guess paying them isn't good enough. Of course, this conclusion is so far removed from reality that I hasten to even talk about it on the show, but I think it demonstrates this warped thinking of the liberal mind, that people, by their very nature, are not trustworthy. Neither the people outside law enforcement nor even the people in it, and that the latter is actually a good thing. The problem is that this premise is not correct, that people will not help each other nor respect each other's rights without the threat of punishment. To that I would ask, if this is so, then why aren't people being robbed while they're walking down the street? I mean, there's not a police officer with each individual in society every second of the day. And under this premise, if law enforcement is not present, then people will not cooperate and obey the law. So what is stopping everyone from committing crimes against each other practically every moment law enforcement is not present? Is because people are not just waiting for a time when they cannot get caught to commit crimes against each other. If you leave most people alone, they'll leave you alone. As I said before, this is just another example of why we cannot let unelected bureaucrats dictate rules and regulations to the rest of us. There are too many people who think like these two researchers. They immediately think everyone is naturally going to do something bad and need to be watched every minute of the day. The other appalling part of their conclusion, that having corruption within the ranks of law enforcement is not only good, but actually beneficial to society, is so totally off base that I cannot believe UT allowed this sort of paper to actually be released. But hey, they have to justify raising their tuition rates year after year, so I guess having something released is better than not having any work to show for all that money being spent. So just something to think about there, just kind of the weirdness that's coming out of some of these researchers and liberals that think that you're always up to something and you got to be watched every minute of the day, or like little kids, you're just going to get into trouble. All right, this is Patrick Riggins. We're coming up on the last segment of the show on, interestingly enough, The Patrick Riggins Show. We will be back after these important messages with the last segment. Don't miss it.
Fighting for freedom, liberty, and the restoration of the Constitution. The Patrick Riggins Show. Call in now at 865-243-8255. That's 243-TALK. And now your host, Patrick Riggins.
This is Patrick Riggins with the Patrick Riggins Show. Sean playing us a little Empire Strikes. What was it? The Imperial March.
The Imperial March.
Yes. Just like they were fighting against that huge overreaching.
Yeah, that's the theme song
power.
for a huge intergalactic overreaching, overtaxing, too involved in people's lives government.
Yeah, so
and they still lost.
Yeah, they still lost.
Spaceships.
Because as we were talking during the break, you do not give up the fight, no matter what happens. Never give up the fight, no matter what is going on. Don't give up the fight, because if you give up the fight, you lost. If you keep fighting, you never lose. Even if you go down, you fought the whole way.
And that's important to remember. They're not fighting the win. They're fighting for you to give up.
That's exactly what it is.
That's winning for them.
That's winning if you'll just give up. Going along those lines of overreaching, and I'm sure a lot of people have already heard this story. It's been just everywhere, that New York City is banning big sizes of sugary drinks. New York's Mayor Bloomberg wants to ban the sale of any cup or bottle of sweetened drink larger than 16 fluid ounces. Go! Yeah, about the size of a medium coffee and smaller than a common soda bottle. It would be prohibited under the First in the Nation plan, which would take effect as soon as next March. He wants to do this because he feels like people in New York are too obese, and it is his job to do something about it. He also says that he thinks this is what the public wants the mayor to do. If the public wanted it, then there would not be a need for the government to require it. Apparently, he thinks we all missed that point.
Save me, mayor!
Save me before I get too fat, before I eat again. So the big question is, does he have the power to do this? His proposal requires the approval of the Board of Health, a step that is considered likely because the members are all appointed by him. The board's chairman is the city's health commissioner who joined the mayor in supporting this measure on Wednesday. Mr. Bloomberg has made public health one of the top priorities of his lengthy tenure and has championed a series of aggressive regulations, including bans on smoking in restaurants and parks. And just in case you didn't know, that's private property as far as the restaurants are concerned. So he's telling you what you can do on your private property. Of course, that's no big thing here in America. Also, a prohibition against artificial trans fats in restaurant food. And again, telling you what you can do with your own restaurant there. In case you're wondering what this has to do with you, many of the measures adopted in New York have become models for other cities, including restrictions on smoking and trans fats, as well as the use of graphic advertising to combat smoking and soda consumption, and the demand that chain restaurants post calorie content next to prices. So your town or state could be next, depending on if the population of New York City stands by and allows this sort of government intrusion to occur. Just to show you how ridiculous this proposal is, it does not stop you from buying multiple cups of something if you want it. You just cannot get it in a cup over 16 ounces at a time. And the mayor, demonstrating his skills and knowledge of the free market, stated he foresaw no adverse effects for businesses. Heck, they could just charge more for smaller drinks if their sales were to drop. So yeah, just charge more. I mean, people will be glad to pay more for a smaller amount. So if you're one of these people who are arguing that national universal health care is not going to result in more and more government intervention in our daily lives, all you have to do is look towards New York City. His mayoral aides say that they are confident that they have the legal authority to restrict these soda sales based on the city's jurisdiction over local eating establishments. This same oversight that allows for the health department's letter-grade cleanliness rating system for restaurants. So if they can come at it from a health department perspective, they see themselves as being able to regulate it. And now this is the same exact reasoning people in Washington will use if Obamacare is allowed to be fully implemented, or even its replacement as Mitt Romney has proposed. The truth is we don't need either one. Neither Obamacare nor whatever Romney is cooking up to replace it with. Anytime government gets involved, the costs skyrocket, and we see that time and again. And if we all stand by and allow these things to happen, then we only have ourselves to blame, because government is us, and we are ultimately responsible for keeping it in check. Coming up on the end of the show, I have just a little bit of good news. Well, it's actually good news for Dr. Paul. A story about Representative Ron Paul seems to indicate that maybe putting your money where your mouth is works if you're correct in your thinking. And there's a story about ever since the economic crisis, Paul has been particularly vocal on the debts and the deficit. He consistently slams the Federal Reserve for overinflating treasuries and feeding Washington's appetite for a fiscal policy that he believes has gapped the abyss future generations will have to pay us out of. He has stated that inflation is just a form of government theft and that it steals people's purchasing power and destroys savings. He notes that the value of the dollar has declined 98% since the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, and that the Federal Reserve has a terrible track record of getting things right. So Paul consistently reminds you, as this radio show does, that you cannot trust the government to run things right, nor to manage the money supply, because no government can, despite the claims of government economists and other self-appointed experts. So apparently, Representative Paul has put his money where his mouth is, though, is gold. According to the stocks and funds Paul owned back in 2010, his dollar-rated return today is 7.11%, which makes his portfolio outperforming the S&P 500 by over 9% today. So it is interesting to note that he puts his money where his mouth is, and unfortunately, he is a threat to the establishment in Washington, which is precisely why they work so hard and continue to do so, to label him an extremist or a kook or anyone else that dares listen to what he says. But the good news is that momentum is building in the libertarian circles, and especially among the younger generation that is growing up amidst more and more government intervention in their daily lives. So thankfully, we're starting to turn things around so we don't leave a huge burden on the future generations of this country. But as I talked about a little bit ago, you have to continue fighting, you have to continue pushing, because government is just always sitting there waiting to pull more of your rights, pull more of your freedom away from you. And the more they do that, the more trouble we get into. So we've come up on the last of the show. Again, I would like to thank everyone for listening and making this show such a success each week. If you'd like more information, you can go to our Facebook page at facebook.com/Patrick Riggins Show. Be sure to hit that like button. And also, you can follow us on Twitter at Patrick Riggins. Join me next Sunday afternoon, where once again we'll talk about freedom, liberty, and the restoration of the Constitution. This is Patrick Riggins. We will see you next Sunday afternoon. Have a great week.
Join us again next week for a solid dose of truth on the Patrick Riggins Show, every Sunday from 4 to 5 p.m. Be there.